Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sorry, I'm just getting things out of my way here. I hope you are here. I know it takes a few minutes for this to connect to you guys so that you can type something in the chat and let me know that you're here. So far, there's one person. Yay! Welcome, whoever you are. Okay, so I just want to go over here and do one thing on Zoom. There we go. All right. So it's Daria. Hello, Daria. It's good to see you. Oh, and Sherry's here and Melanie. Yay. So welcome, everyone. I'm sure others will join soon. And in the meantime, hello, Sandra. I'm going to get started because one of the reasons I'm doing this by myself is because there's a little more cooking to this and preparation to this. And so I didn't know if we'd be able to do it with two people, and I don't know what it's like to do it with one person, so I thought I would find out. Hello, Linda. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is make sourdough pasta. And the reason I decided to do this, and if you're wondering why I'm going back and forth like this, is because I'm on these new sandals that are kind of spongy, and they kind of make me rock back and forth. But anyway, the reason I decided to do this sourdough demonstration is I grew up with us making our own pasta. My father was Italian. He taught my mother how to make it. And so this was something we did every single week. We would make pasta. Of course, all we would do with it is put tomato sauce on it, and that's all there is to it. But, you know, it is what I grew up with. Now, knowing what I know about grains and fermenting and things like that, I was a little curious about sourdough pasta. There is one so far that I have found that you can buy from Caslow, which is a Canadian company. They have a bunch of different varieties, but they're all the same shape. And you can get it in the US. I think Daria looked into that. I think you only found the white one. So there's white with whole wheat, white, all white. There's white with quinoa flour, right? So it's all made the same with a sourdough starter. And then they put in the other flours and they make their little shape, and that's all there is to it. They dry it out. So, hello, Gail. Just keep looking over there to see who's here. So I thought that was interesting. People who have, and again, I want to be very clear about this because there's a lot of misinformation about this. So if you are celiac, you may have trouble digesting, well, you do have trouble digesting wheat and gluten. However, there are some studies that show that if you start with a wheat sourdough starter, and I'm going to show you some starter in a minute, and fold in a flour, say like millet, which is gluten-free, that can be tolerated by celiacs. I don't know what kind of bread that makes. It was just a study that I read. However, I do know that a lot of people who eat sourdough bread, not celiacs, but other people who eat sourdough bread, who have had trouble with wheat, don't have trouble with sourdough. And it varies from person to person. There's no, black and white here. I know the odd person who, despite choosing to do sourdough, it's better for them, but it's not quite there. And again, this goes back to their gut, right? They need to fix or try to do the best they can at fixing the quality of the gut, because this is why they're having trouble with the wheat or the gluten. So it's only natural then that we start thinking about, well, sourdough pasta. If you're going to do sourdough bread, why don't you do sourdough pasta? So that's sort of what got me interested. Now, my first experience with making pasta, and I just saw this on TV today, somebody was doing this on a cooking show, is with white flour and egg. So we would make our pasta with white flour and egg. However, traditionally in Italy, they make it with durum semolina. So one of the issues I always had making my own pasta is that you really have to work it into the flour, into the liquid, right? Sorry, Sherry's saying Caslow is a short drive from where she grew up. Excellent. Too bad you don't live there anymore, Sherry. Because I know where you live and I know where Caslow is. Anyway, so essentially, you would have to work all this flour into the egg. And it took a fair bit of strength. It still takes some strength to do it with the Durham Semolina, but I could never do it, nor could my mother do it as well as my father and my brother. And I could just never get enough flour in. It was still a good pasta, but it's not as good as what my father or brother could make. So I was a little leery when I got this Durham Semolina, and I'm just going to show it to you here. So this is, it's on my hand here. This is Durham Semolina, and as you can see, it's yellow. So it's not quite as refined as, say, white flour. It is made from Durham wheat, which is a different variety. It has a tiny bit of fiber in here, so it's not fiberless. And again, it's really interesting because I thought, okay, this is coarse. This is going to be worse, but it's not. So that was a learning lesson for me. So the first thing I want to show you is that I have, okay, so this is my regular sourdough, and it's just made with unbleached white flour. This is the one I keep around all the time. It sits on my counter so that I'll remember to feed it. So I feed it every day. Because it sits on the counter, I feed it every day. And what that means is I just put in some fresh flour and water and give it a stir. And you know, every 2 or 3 days I have to chuck some out. Well, the chucking is a waste. And this is what you could use to make sourdough pasta, or you could just use some of this because you want to make sourdough pasta. I also throw this into pancake batter and muffins and all kinds of things like that. There's lots of uses for this besides bread. It's not going to make bread, but it does do something to the overall texture that's quite nice. However, since I was going to do it with Durham Semolina, I decided to do some sourdough semolina, Durham Semolina. Okay, so I just took some of this, put it in a jar, added some Durham Semolina and some water, let it sit overnight, fed it again, fed it again, fed it again. At about day 3 is the first time I used it for the pasta. And I made regular Durham Semolina pasta, so just water in the flour. And then I did some with the Semolina sourdough starter because I wanted to see the difference, texture-wise, taste-wise, and ease of make. And they were basically the same, so there's no difference here. Now, if you're wondering why I don't keep this in the fridge, because most people keep their sourdough starter in the fridge, I have a really good reason why I don't do that, because I keep forgetting it, and then they die. And I've killed more sourdough starter than you can imagine. So since I've been keeping it on my counter, I remember to feed it. It's just like I feed the cats, I feed the sourdough starter, you know, I have a routine and it works. So that's an option, but most people do put it in the fridge in case you're thinking, oh, I have sourdough starter now, I've got to feed it every day. No, if you're a little more, you know, disciplined than I am, then you can put it in the fridge and you feed it once a week. Now, if you don't have sourdough starter, you can get some from Cultures for Health. They have dried sourdough that you can rehydrate. And it's not that hard to make sourdough starter. It takes several days to do it. And I did include some instructions in the recipe for the tortellini that I'm going to make, and that you'll see later. And so you can go check that recipe out. The URL for the recipes is in the description box. All right. So we're going to start by making some sourdough. Actually, I think before I do that, I'm going to make the filling. I've been debating this in my head all day, whether I should do the filling first because it has to cool. So I'm going to do the filling first. So we're going to be making tortellini with asparagus and mushrooms, and we're going to be making some chocolate pasta, and I've got some roasted vegetables here for it. So the first thing I'm going to do is remember how to turn on my stove, right? That's always a very handy thing to do. Put in some butter. You don't have to use butter, you can use coconut oil. And what I'm going to do is add some finely chopped onion. And I'm going to let that melt. I know somewhere I have a tool to use. See, now I've tool is in this drawer, and this, I call it a spaghetti machine. This pasta machine is preventing me from opening the drawer. I will look in the dishwasher. So we're just going to let that melt. And I will start to make the sourdough. But once I make the sourdough, I have to knead it for 5 to 10 minutes. And that takes some time. So how much sourdough you add to flour is going to vary on the liquidity of your sourdough starter. So the more liquid it is, the more fresh flour you're going to need to add. The less liquidity it is, the less flour you have to add. And so what we're going to do is, sorry, I'm just looking to see if I got everything I need here, is just measure this out. This is about 1/3 cup. This is very thick. So this is a thick starter. So I'm not going to need a lot of flour. And then I'm just going to add the flour, and I do add extra water to adjust based on how thick the sourdough starter is. So I'm just going to put in 1/2 cup right now. Just in case. All right, so I'm just going to mix this with my hand. Now, you can do this straight on the counter, but I find mixing it in a bowl with a bit of water just to see where I'm at is helpful. And then I turn it upside down onto the counter. And you really got to squeeze this together. And you just dump everything out like that. If you feel you need more water, you just add a titch. And then you start to knead. Okay, so my onions are cooking. Before I get into the full kneading, I'm going to make this. I'm going to add the mushrooms next, and I've chopped them very small because this is going into tortellini, and we don't want big pieces. This makes it harder to fill. We're just going to give a little cook. This doesn't take very long. Now, so I've got onion in here, and mushrooms. I'm adding the asparagus. I'm adding a bit of sage. I'm really into sage lately. Sage is a really underappreciated little herb because it actually is a part of the rosemary family and has amazing health benefits, like rosemary does. Every time I read studies, I find about herbs, they always mention rosemary. And all we're doing here is just sauteing this until it reaches the texture we want. And then we'll put it aside, let it cool. And then later we're going to add some ricotta cheese or some cashew cream cheese. So either one works and both are delicious. We can add a little salt and a little pepper. If it starts to stick, because it hasn't cooked to the amount you want, and this also speeds up the cooking, you can add a bit of water like this. And you really do want this to be the texture that you like for eating, because when it goes into the tortellini cooks so fast that it's not going to get any more cooking. Now, as I said, I put onion in here, but I didn't put garlic. And you might be wondering, well, why didn't you put garlic? Don't you always put garlic? Well, yeah, I generally do, but the garlic is going into the dressing. So you could put it here or you could put it in both. It doesn't really matter. but it's definitely going in the dressing because that's part of what makes the dressing taste good. All right, so that's done. We can just put that to the side and turn this off. All right, so now I'm ready to knead this dough. And I have to knead it for at least 5 minutes. So I don't know if you can see how kind of not very smooth. I don't know if you can see that, okay? We have to knead this until it's nice and smooth. And if it's too sticky, we can put a little bit of flour. But generally, this doesn't stick as much as regular flour does when you make it into either a pastry or a dough or anything like that. So, all right, so I have a question for you. Why do you think garlic, we'll use garlic, we'll leave onions out of this conversation. Why do you think in cultures where garlic is common, they put garlic in just about everything? Anything savory, they put it in. Why do you think that is? Like, if you were getting garlic, wouldn't it be good enough to put it in one dish and then you don't put it in another dish for the same meal, for example? Anybody know the answer to that? I never thought about this until I heard about why. I'm letting you think while I knead. See, this is what you get to do when you are kneading something for 5 minutes. And you notice I'm using 2 hands, right? That's because I'm female. So to get that dough worked and the gluten stretched, I have to use 2 hands. I do this with bread dough too. And don't be afraid to do this. And it's really good arm exercise. Something we also should be thinking about. Nobody's answering my question. Why do you think they put garlic? Just guess. Why do you think they put garlic in every dish? Daria says, I didn't know there would be an actual reason other than some of us love garlic. Well, there's an answer at least. No, there's actually a reason. There's a real reason. Sherry says, does it kill bacteria in raw ingredients as well once we consume it? No, that's not the reason either, although it does have to do with the properties of garlic, why they add it to every meal. Okay, I will tell you. The reason, wait, we got one more. I love garlic and put it in almost everything, but don't know the answer. Okay, Melanie, thank you. So the answer is because in order to get the medicinal benefits of garlic, you wouldn't get it, and you'd really have to add a lot to a given recipe, which is going to throw off the recipe. And I know some recipes have more garlic in them than others, but the reason is that if you spread it out over a number of dishes, you know, lunch and dinner, for example, you're more likely to get all the benefits of garlic in the amount that research now shows. So they were doing this before there was research, but research now shows you need in order to get the anti-cancer, antifungal, you know, all these different benefits that are found in garlic, right? Antibacterial, a lot of phytonutrients that do all kinds of things that are helpful to us. So that's the reason. So that's why I'm really glad that I do put garlic in everything. Now, whether that's true for onions, I don't know. They're the same kind of family. They have some of the same benefits. And maybe it's true. I haven't read that yet. I'm going to assume since we put onions in almost everything that it might be. All right. Now, while I do this, I will tell you why you might want to do this. So we're going to be looking at what I looked at was obviously sourdough bread research. There's no research on sourdough pasta, of course. Barely buy it, let alone somebody research it. But when you look at research for sourdough bread, one of the things they found about using the fermented grain is that it slows down the glycemic response. So it helps, this is with white flour. So this helps not spike blood sugar. I did read one study where it also talked about how it was good for supporting immune health, that they measured immune response and found it higher. There's been a lot of studies about it, most of it for glycemic response. Now, it's this, in both cases, whether it's the pasta or the bread, you have to add fresh flour. So even though the starter can be very fermented and it's very broken down and the gluten is very broken down, it's the putting in of the fresh flour that turns it into the dough that you're going to use, whether it's pasta or whether it's bread. So if somebody has a problem with that flour, then that may be why they don't do well with sourdough. But for most people, you know, I would recommend obviously an organic flour. Then you're not getting any glyphosate sprayed flour, which is also an issue for some people digestively. And I would recommend the Durham Semolina because it's far easier to make it into a nice pliable dough than it is working with all-purpose flour the way I used to make it when I was growing up, which I never would have believed because it's grainy and coarse. So I thought it's not going to be smooth. All right, so I don't know if it's been 5 minutes. I'm hoping you're appreciating my kneading technique. I hope you really see it as an opportunity to do a workout for your arms because it's really good. You know, when we think of all the things that we've lost over the years, these are the kind of exercises we've lost over the years. This is much cheaper than joining a gym. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it now, but it's very pliable, okay? It's very pliable. That's the gluten, it's been stretched. Now what you want to do is put this aside for 30 minutes, let the gluten stretching calm down so it'll roll nicely. And that's all there is to it. It's ready to go. Okay, so I made this up ahead of time. I made this afternoon. This is a chocolate sourdough. Okay, and the only difference between it and, turn the water on here. The only difference between it and the regular sourdough I just made is I added cocoa. Now the cocoa that I added, I wish you could buy this in the store, and I hope you can see this. I think you can. I know you can get it on Amazon. It's called 2224. This is the real great cocoa, not the 1012 that most of us have for sale in our grocery stores. Oh, Melanie says she's learning from my kneading. Yes, well, it's a good technique. It really is. Okay, so all you have to do is exactly the same thing, except you're going to add a tablespoon of cocoa. And if you're getting the 1012, you'll do a tablespoon and a half. And if you want to add a little maple syrup, so I add about, to the recipe that I have, I add about a tablespoon of 2224 cocoa and about 2 teaspoons of maple syrup. And that'll take the bitterness out of the cocoa. This one, it works so well. And it doesn't taste like you're eating chocolate per se. So I'm going to show you how to roll it. I'm going to show you first using my handy dandy little machine here. So I'm cheating. This is not what people who do this thing would do. They would lay this little piece down, they'd put some flour down, and they'd roll it like this first, and then they put it in the machine. But I just squish it out like this. Yeah, just squish it. Just squish it. And then I stick it in here. So there's a slot for, and you can put extra flour on it too if you like, if you feel it's a little sticky. So there's a slot for doing it straight like this. And then you can make it thinner. You can make it very, 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 very thin, which gives you more the texture of angel hair pasta. Or you can just do a normal one. And then once you've got a length that you like, remember this, if you're going to make lasagna or something like that, this is what you would do. Then you put it through, you've got a spaghetti and a fettuccine style cutter, and you just put that through, and you have pasta. Now, normally what I would do, where's my parchment? One of the biggest problems you have when you make fresh pasta is it likes to stick. So this I find does not stick the way regular pasta does. It actually is quite nice. All right, I'm just going to do one more piece, and then I'm going to show you how to do this by hand in case you don't have a a pasta machine, because I imagine that a lot of you don't have a pasta machine. I found this so much easier to roll than the pasta that I used to make. I just can't believe how easy this durum semolina stuff is to work. Now, the problem with this pasta, and this is true for most fresh pastas, is they cook really, really fast. They cook so fast that you probably are at risk of overcooking it. So I tend to roll this a little thicker than I might normally do if I was just going on the texture that I like. And because I want a little bit of a cook time. And what I recommend that you do is do this up ahead of time, let it sit. Now there's a really cool little machine here that you can buy if you want to dry out your pasta. And you can just lay everything on like this and let it dry overnight. I will tell you, sorry, it actually goes on much easier when I haven't mucked it first. This one dries really nicely. It doesn't fall apart. Here's some that I dried. This is the stuff that I dried. The chocolate one holds up. The white one tends to fall apart more. So what I do to compensate for that is another way you can dry them is to find muffin cups and you just put a little bunch in like this. This holds up really nicely for the white pasta or for, this is a whole wheat one. So those are just options that you have. All right, but we're gonna put this guy over here because he's going into the stove, the pot. He's gonna be part of our dish. And I'm just gonna show you how to roll by hand. So there's not much to this. You literally, put some flour on the counter. How many of you actually, Gary's asking, can you use raw cacao? The problem with raw cacao is it has the same lack of rich flavor that 1012 has. So yes, you can use it, but it won't have the rich flavor. And by the way, it doesn't have more antioxidants in it necessarily than regular cocoa. So I read this study years ago where there's a certain temperature requirement for the for the cacao to turn into cocoa, and the antioxidants go up at a certain temperature. Don't ask me what it is, I'd have to track down that study again. But the point is that it doesn't matter. If you like raw cacao, use it. If you like the richer cocoa, use that. As I said, you can get the 1012 on Amazon. Okay, so all you have to do, if you have a pastry cutter like this, you can even this up, make it a little square, and then you take something like this. This is what I roll with. This is a little wooden dowel from the hardware store. Had it for years. My brother made it for me. You make this into a straight line. And then you just move it over. I hope you can see this. Just move it over enough to get the size that you want. And then you just go along like that. And it really does work better. This is from the dollar store, just saying. It really does work better with one of these cutters than with a knife. You can do it with a knife too. All right, and so then we have our hand rolled pieces. Okay, so what we're going to do with this, and by the way, these little scraps, you can re-roll them. All right, we're just going to, now you're going to think this is a very strange method, but I'm only doing that because I'm doing this. First, I'm going to add a little salt to the water. Whoops, not that much. And then Putting this in here. It's going into the pot. Well, there was a good plan here, but this plan's not working the way I planned the plan to work. So normally I would just dump it in the water, but I'm trying to have an efficient use of space here. No, that's not working. All right, we'll just dump it in. Here we go. I was trying to save having to boil the water twice. So essentially what you do is you just dump it in, and when it floats back up to the top, it's basically done. That's how fast. So if you've let it sit for a couple of hours, it dries out a bit. It's not quite this fast. And you can overcook this fairly easily. So this is done. That's it. Done. Now you may also want to rinse this a bit. And then we're going to let it drain. So all the water gets off. And then once the water is off, we're just going to put this on a plate. And then this is a vegetable mixture I made up earlier. So what I did was I roasted red peppers, onions, yellow peppers, and zucchini together with some onion and garlic, put in some dried basil, and then threw in spinach at the end just for extra greens. And what you're going to do is just put this on top. The vegetables have a lot of olive oil on them, so that's going to mix in with the pasta. And then I have some fresh basil leaves here. And you're going to think, oh, this is a really bad way of doing chopped basil. This is what I do. I just tear it into some pieces and then just do some little small knife cuts. And sprinkle it on top. And look at all that color. Look at all that like yumminess. Now, if I was eating this, I would just take my fork and spoon and I would mix it all up so it covers the pasta. But it's ready to serve. And you can serve it with any, if you grilled something or you want to add some chickpeas to it or something else to go with it on top. It's already cooked. You just go right ahead. And you can make this very, very quick and very easily. A lot of stages can be done ahead, like the pasta and the vegetables. You can reheat the vegetables if you want it hot. You can serve it cold if you like. So that's dish number one. All right, so now we're going to roll our tortellini. And I have a dough that I made up earlier today, so it has rested. And I have to say, sorry, Sherry says, best to tear rather than cut basil, keeps the color better. Yes, but then I cut it with a knife, so then I throw that right out the window. Sandra says, looks delicious. Thank you, Sandra. Okay. So what you want to do with this tortellini is roll it really, really thin. I need to start my water again. Really thin. So where we roll the fettuccine a little thicker, this is going to be really, really thin. Now, how many of about you? First of all, how many of you have ever made pasta? I'm curious. Have any of you ever made it from scratch? Notice how this doesn't stick. Like if this was all-purpose flour, it would be sticking. It doesn't stick. It's amazing. I just love this durum semolina. Now, it's still not thin enough. See, you can't quite see my fingers through it. Derry says, I have, but no longer own my pasta machine. Sandra hasn't. Sherry says, yes, I'm trying to remember if I donated my pasta machine. I know, we forget about them. They get neglected. All right, so you're going to roll this nice and thin, as thin as you can make it. And this all has to do with texture and getting the ideal taste and texture for these tortellinis. So what happened many years ago, many years ago, still not quite thin enough, is in Toronto, if you wanted a good Italian restaurant, you had to go to downtown Toronto. There weren't that many of them. Most were not too dissimilar with what we have now, which were, kind of like pizza combination pasta. But if you wanted a really good Italian restaurant, there was one downtown called La Scala. And I ate a tortellini there, where they made all their pasta by hand, which was unusual. And they had it so thin, and it was just the right balance of filling to pasta. And I don't know if you've had tortellini, you know, the kind you buy in the store and it's frozen. It's kind of thick. And I know why they do it. It's being made by machine. So what are they going to do? But when you roll your own, you can make it nice and thin. You can almost see my fingers through this, right? You can see my fingers almost. I might even give it a little more. Nice and thin. And what you want is a cutter. And you can do, I've done this size and I've done this size in the last week. They're both good. Depends. How many tortellini do you want to make? If you want to make a lot, then you're going to use this size because they're so cute. If you want to save some time and just make the bigger ones, you can do this, okay? So you just cut out the circles. And again, this does not stick. Normally, when I cut things with this flour cutter, assuming I cut it, I have to put flour on here, and I have to put lots of flour on the dough. This is for anything, pastry, cookies, you name it. But with this, I don't have to do that. So I just cut them out. And again, this can be re-rolled. And now they're ready to be filled. And you see I got nice little circles, right? Nice little thin. I just can't tell you how good the strength is of this durum semolina. All right, so all you have to do is we take our filling. I'm just going to use these bowls here. I'm going to split this in two. So we're going to put some in here, and we're going to put some in here. And if you want, you can hold back some of this and throw it onto the plate for decoration too, because I did that. If you look at the picture that I did, that's what I did. I just held some of this back. I'll just hold a little back. Okay, so we want, this is cashew cream cheese. So for those who don't want to do dairy, they can use that. I don't know where those spoons go to. So you just put in maybe a couple of tablespoons for this amount. And I've got the most saddest, most forlorn little kitty looking at me right now because he threw up his dinner and he's hungry and he doesn't know what I'm doing. And he's not meowing. So, and then you just put ricotta in here. You can season it and taste it again and season it if you like. I'm just going to mix it all in. You could do this without ricotta cheese or cashews. You could just do it with the vegetables if you like. Okay. This up. Okay. So back to my story about the scala. This tortellini was so good. I've dreamt about it for years, never had anything quite like it. Well, when I made the tortellini for the first time last week, rolled it nice and thin, I had it. That was the texture. That was that thin tortellini with a beautiful flavor filling on the inside. It was so delicious. It was so delicious. It kept me up all night thinking about it. I was so excited about how good this tortellini tasted. And for that reason alone, you should all make this. That's reason enough. It was just, if you like pasta, you should make this. All right, so here's our little circle. We're gonna put a little bit of filling on each one, not very much. A little cashew in here. Takes very little filling. That's why, you know, when you buy them, they have so little filling in them, but they have so much dough, they're not that pleasant unless you like eating dough. So this makes much more sense. And then what you want to do, and I'm hoping you can see this, is take your finger with some water, put it around the edge like this. Then you fold this over in half, okay? And you squeeze together, move the filling so that it goes out a little bit. So you've got a nice little half moon like this, see this? Then you're going to take the two ends and you're going to bring them together like this, okay? And then you want to squeeze them, and then you're going to turn down the collar. See, isn't that the cutest little thing you ever saw? So this is the only part that's a bit of a pain. The rolling doesn't take much time. I can tell you that this amount that I've been working with, to roll it out like the fettuccine with the machine takes about 10 minutes, the whole thing. But this is a little more finicky. But, okay, so I told you about how you can dry it. And I told you that if you leave it for a couple of hours to dry a bit, it doesn't cook quite as fast. Okay, so, whoops, come back to you. No. Normally I do this on the counter. I don't hold it up like that, but I'm trying to, hopefully you can see this. And what I did with these last week was freeze them. And I wanted to see which is the best method. Freezing them, letting them sit for 2 hours, or doing them fresh. The freezing worked the best because it slowed down the cook time. So I took them straight from the freezer into the boiling water. It took about 5 minutes to cook. These are going to take seconds, like there's hardly anything to it. All right. One more time. You put the two ends together. You fold down the collar. Sometimes they split like that. I don't know if you can see that. It's sort of split. So some of the filling is going to come out in the water. That's okay. And away we go. Be careful not to put too much water when you're trying to seal them, because that can make the pasta gooey. All right, so there we have 6 cute little tortellinis. I could roll this all out if I wanted to, but I don't think you want to watch me do that, so I won't. And now we're ready to cook it. But before we cook it, we are going to make the dressing. So I'm calling it a dressing. You can call it a sauce. Doesn't matter. All you need for this is a blender. I have my handy dandy Ninja here, and I'm going to put in some parsley, and I'm going to put in some lemon juice. And again, how much lemon juice you add is going to be up to you. If you like it really tart, add more. If you want it less, do that. And I'm going to add some garlic. See, here's the garlic. I'm going to throw in some avocado, which again is your choice. If you want avocado, throw it in. If you don't, there's also yogurt going in here, so it's not absolutely necessary. You don't need a lot. And I'm going to put in a bit of honey. The jar is almost empty. What I like about honey, it's gooey. All right, and then we're going to add olive oil. And we're going to add some yogurt. So we're getting some probiotics in here as well. We're putting in some sea salt. We're putting in some pepper. And we hope we have enough in here that the blender is actually going to blend. And this is a Ninja, and Ninjas are very noisy, but I love it. Love my Ninja. Okay, I guess there was enough in there. Now, I don't know why I didn't bring the plates down, but I didn't bring the plates down. So all we have to do now is cook the pasta. And as I said, this is super fast. And I had a special tool. Oh, there you are. Okay. So normally what I do is I put a little bit on here if I'm going to be fancy. I just put a little bit on here like that. And then I'm putting the pasta in. And as I said, this doesn't take very long. This takes minutes or seconds. So basically you put it in, and when it floats to the top, the pasta is cooked. That is the rule of fresh pasta. When you dry this pasta, it takes longer to cook. It takes around 8 to 10 minutes, depending on how you like your texture. I don't know if you can see this, but they're still not at the top. They're slowly coming to the top. Some of them are at the top. And then like I said, I like to rinse these because they can get a little. I've heard two things. One is you don't rinse them because the sort of the starchiness of it allows the sauce to stick better. But I just find with the it's better if I rinse them. They're less slimy. Okay, so that is our. Just gonna put them there for a minute. Let them drain a bit. Okay, so now you just put this on the plate. And if you want, as I said, you can use some of this stuff and, see how it just picks up the color. You can take some fresh sage. Again, I just tear it up. I'm lazy. That's the bottom line, and I can throw the fresh sage on. And then you can take some of your dressing, as I call it, you can call it sauce. And you drizzle it over. Wondering how I did it in the picture, I did it with a piping bag. I did not do this. All right, so that's dish number 2. Now, it's not too hard, right? What does this taste like? Well, this is going to be a nice snack after I finish this episode. But it's delicate. It's not chewy. It's not slimy. It's not anything. It's just got a nice texture to it, and you really get the flavor of the filling. I don't know about you, but when I eat tortellini, I get the pasta taste, and you might get a little bit of ricotta cheese if that's what they put in it, or meat if that's what they put in it. And quite frankly, neither the ricotta cheese or the meat is that tasty the way they've done it. And I know it's a big mass production thing, and I know that's why. So this is worth my while. This is something that I would like to eat on a regular basis. One from the store, Now, if you don't want to go to all the trouble of forming the tortellini, you could have just done it at the half moons stage and left it that way and cooked them like that. That's kind of like a ravioli. Ravioli tends to be square, but let's not get caught up on names here. You can call it ravioli if you like. If it's a half moon, doesn't really matter. That also works really well too. So if you don't want to be too fiddly with it, but I thought, you know what, maybe you want to see how did they come up with this. I don't know how they came up with it, by the way. Why they would think that you put this together and then fold down the collar doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Helen says, I love your enthusiasm. And Morella says, Marine's enthusiasm is contagious. Now I want to make pasta. Yes, you do. Because did that look hard? You will have to experiment a little bit for the taste and texture that you like. Like I said, with the chocolate one, I can't really taste the cocoa. Here's another question for you. Why would we add cocoa to the pasta? Or raw cacao if you want to. Why would we add that? Why would we bother? We're not making dessert. By the way, I originally made the chocolate pasta. I was going to turn it into dessert. And we used to deep fry our pasta as a cookie, peanut, and we would dust it with icing sugar. Sometimes we would make an icing with it and dip that in it as well. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll do that with the chocolate one and see what it comes out like. And it didn't taste like I wanted it to. I even did some of the fresh pasta. It didn't taste what I wanted it to. So I'd say the cookies are basically for you better with the all-purpose flour and the egg type of pasta. All right, so got more people wanting to eat the pasta. And Daria says, antioxidants for the cocoa. That is correct. So one of the concepts that we're trying to bring across in these episodes is that you build better recipes, and the more you put in that has nutrient density or nutrient richness, whichever you want to call it, the more each meal has value. It has much more value if you can load these things in. So if you look at a typical tortellini that's just ricotta cheese and pasta, there's not a lot of nutrient density in that. It's going to all come from whatever sauce that they use, which is usually just tomato. But if you look at this recipe, what do we got? We got the pasta and the durum semolina. That has good resistant starch in it to help with your gut health. We have the asparagus and the mushrooms. They're both good gut foods because they have lots of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. We have the ricotta cheese or the cashew cheese. They both have nutrient value and are good for the gut. And we have the dressing or the sauce, whatever you want to call it. And it has parsley, it has avocado, it has olive oil, it has yogurt, garlic, right? Honey. These are all nutrient-rich foods. And we just added that all with one dish, right? Versus compare that to what a typical tortellini is. Same is true for the chocolate pasta. It has now the benefit of the durum semolina and the good resistant starch for the gut. Now it has the antioxidants added for the cocoa, plus cocoa or chocolate is prebiotic as well, so it feeds good gut bacteria. And it's going on to, or what's going on to the pasta, were a bunch of vegetables with all kinds of benefits to them. Olive oil, like more onion, like the list goes on about all the benefits you're getting just from a simple meal because we added more ingredients into the recipe. So that's why the cocoa went in. That's why it stayed in when it turned out not to be such a good dessert. I thought, but you know what? It tastes good as a pasta. It's just by itself. So I'm just going to use it like I use any other pasta. All right. Now, Marilla says chocolate is good with everything. Darius says, I have made a fruit lasagna for dessert before. That would be very interesting. I can see that one, where you layer the pasta and then put in different fruit layers, and depending on how you flavor the fruit, could have some really good textures and tastes to it. And give the fruit dessert a little weight for those who like a little more substantialness to their desserts that maybe fruit alone wouldn't give. It might even go really well with the oranges and berries that you did last week, Daria, in the red wine sauce. And I bet that would be very tasty. All right, so does anybody have any questions? I wasn't sure I could get through all of that, but somehow I did. Someday I'll decide whether I just took on too much with this or not. But in the meantime, I'm glad that it happened. We got to see both plates. And hopefully this gives you the courage to do it. As I said, you can create your own sourdough. Another suggestion I would have if you're looking for sourdough starter is, if you know somebody who has it, ask them for some. It's so easy for somebody to give it to you. And the second thing is you could go to a local sourdough bread bakery. They might give you some too. Daria said that was phenomenal. Oh, thank you, Daria. Okay. I don't think maybe you have any questions. I think I answered everything and I told you everything I wanted to do. Just watch how you work with it. So let it dry a bit for 2 hours if you're going to do it fresh. And it's funny enough, my mother always rolled the pasta 2 hours before she cooked it. I thought she was just being, efficient. And now I realize she was doing it for a reason. But as I said, freeze the tortellini works really well and it's super fast. It still cooks in 3 to 5 minutes. It's so good. And then you might want to dry the regular pasta so it's ready to go when you want it to go. Have you got any sourdough to spare? Yes, Sherry, I can always give people sourdough. You just have to come to the house to pick it up. I know, aren't you in the Scarborough area, Sherry? Somewhere around there. Okay, so can you start feeding a regular whole wheat sourdough with some semolina? Yes, you can. So I did make a semolina pasta, and took the semolina starter and I put into it whole wheat flour. You could do the reverse. You take the whole wheat starter and put the semolina in. That came out really nice too. That would be my go-to to make on a regular basis. You can take any starter, like if it's a whole wheat starter, it would take a while to turn it into some other kind. That's why I keep a white starter, because it's easier to turn a white starter into whole wheat than whole wheat into white, rye, or any other type of starter. So yes, you can. Okay, well, Sherry, just email me and we'll make arrangements for your starter. The starter I have came from my brother, and his friend gave it to him, and his friend has been in his family for 107 years. Now, just to clarify, because people call that a 100-year-old starter, the starter itself isn't actually 100 years old, because obviously the bacteria that was there 107 years ago is long gone, and what's there today is what came recently. But it's old and it's good. All right. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending. I'll be posting the replay in the webpage that is listed in the description. And next week, I'm back with Marilla Kodraka, and we are going to be talking about alternative sugars and sweeteners. clearing up a lot of the myths about that, talking about what ones you might want to try and use for what purposes. And we're going to have 2 recipes using unique ingredients, although for some of you they won't be all that unique, but for other people they might be very unique. And we'll talk about, again, this idea of building better recipes. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. And I will see you next time. If I can find my mouse amongst all this mess. Now I've got my cord stuck in the drawer. Okay. Good night, everyone.